Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and today we're going to look at the very first set of fights from Robot Havoc 4. This is a 2-day event that gets filmed at Science Alive, so there is a full-on crowd in behind the arena. Every time we have a fight, it's the biggest event that ARC does every year, and it is so much fun. So we're going to look at this in pieces. We're looking at the Melty Brain today. We're going to be looking at Annie, Are You Okay? Next week, then Vogon Poetry, and then the B-grade robot that I put in Spooky, along with some other interesting rumbles and grudge matches and things that happened along the way as well. There is a lot to cover here. It was a lot of fighting for a 2-day period. Anyway, let's jump straight on into this and start with It Works' first fight against Spin Smash, which its creator said is a Melty without the brain, because this is built by Steve and driven by his young son Nath. And Nath, you've seen before on this channel, he has driven Double Smasher and Smasher in the past, and he really likes to dance fight a lot. This particular bot though, he really just likes to spin it up and see what happens.
3, 2, 1, go!
Okay, so a lot to talk about in this one from my side. Not particularly a lot to talk about in this one from Spin Smasher's side, because Nate did exactly what Nate wanted to do, which was spin the robot at an exceptionally fast speed and just leave it there. Now, interestingly enough, I will say that him and the Melty are both using exactly the same motors running on exactly the same speeds. So you can see that I've actually had to slow the Melty speed down off of what its maximum could be so that I can have some headroom to do some translation and stuff like that in there. Speaking of the translation, yeah, it wasn't great. It was okay, but it wasn't that quick, and it wasn't in the direction that I was trying to get it to go. So there was a couple of times where I had to drop out of the Melty mode and just chase after Spin Smash because it was just spinning. And then of course when I was over by the pit, I had to drop out of Melty mode there as well. I did try and run away from the pit while meltying and trying to use my translation to get out of that situation. But as I tried, there was a little bit of moving away and then a little bit of moving back, so it was kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back type thing, and I was just like, I'm going to lose this fight by doing this. And he's on his last legs, so I decided it was a much better idea to stop the Melty, get away from there, and just bring the fight back to him and, you know, not go down the pit because I was trying my hardest to translate and not having that be a successful thing. Yeah, so the other thing that happened in this fight too is that one of the weapons wasn't spinning up. I seemed actually to be having kind of battery issues because I'd put a smaller battery in here than the last time I'd run it, and even the last couple of times I tested it, and the battery seemed to be having trouble running both weapons and the melting all at the same time. I mean, it was also having trouble running one of the weapons entirely, I think, because I added some extra teeth to the pulleys that are on the motors that drive the weapons, basically because they were a little bit thin. So I was like, oh, if I add a couple of extra teeth, they will thicken up, and they did indeed do that, but it pulled the belts tighter, and on one side I think it just got too tight, and yeah, it was trying to draw too much current, especially out of the battery that was already being kind of overloaded. It just wasn't happy, didn't really work, which was unfortunate. Yeah, so between this fight and the next fight, I actually sat down, put the better battery back in, which has a higher current carrying capacity, and did a few quick tests in the arena where I was basically messing with the translation settings and the melty speed settings and the heading settings, and trying to get everything dialed in and working a little bit better. The one interesting thing that did kind of happen here is I had a weird brownout issue where if I plugged the power wire in just the right way, the whole robot would turn on and everything would initialize, and then as that kind of final push was happening with the plug, the brain board would switch off and the heading light would disappear. It only happened once or twice, and then everything seemed to stop, which is why the testing was able to go ahead. So I didn't think too much of it, but I was a touch worried about that. And the next fight almost didn't happen, weirdly enough. It was supposed to be a morning fight, but somehow there was a clerical error and it got called a draw without having ever happened. And I saw that on the schedule and went, wait, what? And queried it, and it was just a weird clerical error thing. So instead, It Works was fighting Iron Tooth straight up in a bracket in a section or a session for the audience where I already had another fight scheduled against Anti-Dozer. So I was needing to do both of these fights in one session if I could, which, if you've been around here before and you know Iron Tooth, you know that this thing hits like an absolute truck. So I was a little bit worried about going into this one because I didn't think I was going to be able to make it out and make the Anti-Dozer fight at the end of the session, which would have been about, 6 minutes after I'd gone in with Iron.
2, 1, go!
Oh boy, Iron Tooth. Yeah, so the good first, let's start there. The battery change did seem to help things because the weapon spun up totally fine. The whole robot managed to actually get spinning, so I had the weapon spinning and the melting going, which means that yes, the old battery did just have current draw issues. However, it was a one-hit wonder. Whatever that weird brownout power issue was came back to bite us in the ass because, one hit from Iron Tooth and that issue reared its ugly head and stopped the robot dead in its tracks. Iron Tooth gave us one nice little love tap after we'd kind of died in the water there because I basically was just fiddling with the controls trying to get everything to go and hadn't actually told him that I was dead yet. Yeah, Iron Tooth hits like a truck. There is a decent chunk of damage, especially for the fact it was only really 1, maybe 2 hits in that fight. But the pulleys, the new aluminium pulleys that I had machined, are holding up amazingly well. Another big thank you to PCBWay for them because they got a straight shot from Iron Tooth and didn't die, didn't break, were completely serviceable and usable for the rest of the competition, which is amazing. That was that fight. It could have gone a lot worse. But of course it was very disappointing to die to a silly brownout, power out issue like that. Speaking of which though, we're going on into another fight with Anti-Dozer because that fight was so short that I was like, well, I have the battery power, everything seems to be mostly working. So I just, rehooked some of the stuff up and threw it straight back in against Anti-Dozer, kind of expecting a similar result.
2, 1, go!
exactly the same result realistically. Yeah, we managed to spin up, but doing so mean that we dished out a big hit, or not even a really big hit for us. We were kind of like a quarter speed on the melty, probably like half speed on the weapons. It did a decent hit. The actual damage taken out of Anti-Dozer was pretty good for how everything was at that particular moment in time, but of course it then also killed the robot dead, and yeah, that's where we were. So, what do you do about all of this? Well, I had one more fight that afternoon. This is the Saturday afternoon sessions. I had one more fight that afternoon. I had about half an hour between the Anti-Dozer fight and fighting Peter Griffin, who was up next. And so I went hunting for the issue, basically, and it was essentially an it works afternoon. I was just spending a lot of time fault finding and hunting inside the electronics here because it is a spaghetti mess in there. And eventually what I found out is if I put the entire thing in the test box and powered it up and pushed just in the right place, the brain board switched off. And then when I opened everything up and looked at what was under that exact place, it was the power cable going from the junction of the actual wiring loom into the brain board. So I figured that there was something wrong with that connector, swapped all that connector out, hot glued everything up, threw it back in the box, and couldn't melt it into a wall to save my life. So instead I ended up putting it back into drive mode and just slamming it, like driving back and forth across the box, slamming it into the walls, and not having any issues. So I figured, hey, got that problem solved. This fight against Peter Griffin is going to be interesting. So let's take a look at that one.
3, 2, 1, go!
Right, so a couple of things again. So I lost a weapon pulley on spin up, like pre-fight spin up, just that kind of quick little flick you do to test your weapons out, make sure everything's going before they say, all right, we're locked in, let's get out of there. And I actually decided to stick it out and stick with this fight, mostly because It Works was already guaranteed not to make finals, and we needed the fight to happen, so I figured we're just going to go ahead and go through with it, and I still had one, so I was like, that's fine. Once I'm in melty mode, it's not going to make too much difference. We'll just hit him with the back one rather than the front one. Whatever. Yeah, and then the same electrical issue seemed to rear its ugly head, despite the fact that I thought I'd fixed it, and it seemed like I had. That first hit, we got thrown up in the air, came back down kind of hard, and it was fine. Everything seemed to still be going. The melting still happened, and then the second hit happened, and my hopes and dreams died. Or the hopes and dreams of this working and actually doing good things in this particular tournament died. Yeah. So I guess we should probably talk about pulleys a little bit too. I exploded a bunch of them this weekend. I think it's all down to the fact that the outer edge of the pulley teeth is not that thick, not that much thicker than the actual motor diameter. So by continually running a belt against them, I was wearing them down a little bit, and it didn't take all that much to break them because they were just that thin. I mean, these things look like rings, basically. So I'm going to have to do something about that in a future version. There is going to be a version 3 of the melty. We're not going to continue work on this exact chassis or in this exact orientation. There is going to be new things happening with the melty in the near future, which is going to be fun. Anyway, so that was the end of the first day, and at this point, It Works' all of its official fights were done. And it was at this point that I remembered that in previous times we've had an issue like this before, and it was actually due to the power regulator on the brain board that I've made up. It's got its own little power regulator that powers up the Teensy that runs all of the melty code. And in the past we've had issues with that, so I just threw in an external BEC, like an actual proper BEC from an RC car, and that ran everything totally fine. So overnight I decided, all right, well, no harm in it. Let's throw in an external BEC and have everything work off that instead and see if that fixes anything, and then just sign it works up for as many grudge matches as we possibly can. Starting at 1, and then if we die in that, not doing any more, but if we don't die in that, doing more. So the morning of the Sunday, I went in and threw it works into the test box just to make sure everything was working, and unfortunately one of the motors was not working. It turned out that one of the ESCs had died. Thankfully it wasn't the ESC that I was using to do the melting timings, so I figured I could still throw it in the box for a grudge match and still manage to melty correctly. I just couldn't drive in a straight line. So I ended up challenging Steve and his robot sorted history, and basically asked him if he could just go a little bit nice on me and allow me to spin everything up and just see what happens.
3, 2, 1, game on, here we go. Now, do we have a disabled block? Let's see how they work. You don't have to do all the damage stuff like put them like blocks. You can't move, you get the wing, they move under the wing, you get the wing. That's a win as well. So if the wing can't move, we give it 5 seconds. There's still life left in this match. Hello, life, still life left. Here we go. Back up. Oh, we got a little fan belt loose there. Plenty of movement, but not in the right direction. 1 minute and 15 seconds. Damage done. Alright. Alright, the countdown 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. We're still alive! We're the match still. Spin around 25 seconds. Wow.
So, that is the best the melty worked all weekend. Everything spun up, all pretty well actually. I replaced one of the pulleys back to a smaller, thinner pulley, and that allowed that weapon to get up to speed. In fact, both weapons seemed to get to about the same speed, which is weird because one of them had more teeth on its pulley than the other, but I don't know, there was something going on with belt tensions and all of that kind of stuff, and motor torque issues and things that was all just a bit weird. But the melty did manage to get spinning up, which was awesome. Everything spun. The triple death hum is just amazing, and I love that, and I want to keep that sound forever. But of course, yeah, while Steve was very nice and allowed me to spin up fully a couple of times there, I did get caught in the corners twice, which is not good when you can only drive on one wheel. Yeah, didn't like that so much. I almost got counted down the second time. Did manage to eventually wiggle my way out of that one and try to get spinning again, but of course I was right near the pit, so it just boop, and down I went, which was totally fair. If I had two-wheel drive, that fight would have been a very, very different fight. Oh, that's the other thing too. The melty translation was just non-existent on one wheel, which is something that I kind of knew about if you watched the last week's video on melty translating code stuff. I found out that if I only did one wheel at a time for melting, the translation just sucks for some reason. Not 100% sure on that. Yeah, so I didn't have any translation ability, and I was basically reverted to being a very bad spin smash with weapons rather than hammers. So that was a time, basically. As I said, there will be a version 3 of the melty. The plan at this point is to scrap everything I've got and start again from square one. I'm going to write new code, do new pinouts on the brain board, the teensy board. Yeah, run everything so that it can be run faster and better and more accurately. So there you go. Interesting results all around. Very annoying and unfortunate set of middle fights through this particular event for It Works. But look, that happens sometimes, and next time what I really need to be doing is cluing into that quicker and remembering my mistakes from the past and fixing those earlier than what I did here. Because if I had remembered that old Beck trick, we probably would have had different fights against at least Anti-Dozer and Peter Griffin, which would have been interesting ones to have longer, more drawn out fights against. But of course, their fights would have been not as good as I wanted them to be anyway because of weapon issues. So lots of things to consider, lots of things to upgrade and improve, lots of things to be looking out for with version 3 of the melty, which still undecided on a name on. We'll have to work out that one eventually. Anyway, hope you guys have enjoyed this one. I will see you next week for Annie Are You OK's journey through Robot Havoc 4.